Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to cover the topic of third worldism, a particular strand of Marxist ideology. I'm going to explain its origins, its reasoning, and my criticism of it. What do I mean when I talk about third worldism? I am referring to tendencies of Marxism which attempt to bring about a revolution in underdeveloped economies first. The most well-known strands would be Maoism. Okay. How did third worldism come about? If we look back into the 1920s, against all expectations, the Russian Revolution succeeded, despite Russia consisting mostly of peasantry and having only very few industrial centers, while the German Revolution, which failed in a nation with both large industrial bases and a highly popular socialist party. Additionally, social democracies, in the modern sense, first came into being in Europe. Worker discontent, therefore, was low due to welfare policies, pro-labor legislation, and political representation in parliaments. Those developments were explained by the idea that communist revolutions would happen first at the peripheries of capitalism rather than at the center, and communism would spread from the peripheries into the center. This was justified by the following. Underdeveloped capitalist nations lacked social welfare and were also undemocratic, which led to a higher discontent among lower classes. If you could form an alliance between peasantry and workers, you could also compensate for the lack of a working class. The peasants, in the minds of third worldists, could be won over by the promises of land reform as well as anti-landlord policies. The new government could quickly industrialize and thus obtain the necessary industrial base for a large enough military to fend off foreign threats, as well as developing the proletariat required for a socialist nation. There are two major problems with that. Problem one, the peasantry isn't a revolutionary class. There were numerous peasant uprisings during the medieval ages. None of them had significant success. The peasantry is geographically decentralized rather than concentrated. Additionally, the peasantry's relationship to the means of production is different from that of the worker. The ownership divide between farmer and landlord is not so clear. Farmers often have a small amount of private land, and there's an intrinsic benefit to the ownership of small amounts of land, which isn't the case with small amounts of constant capital. There's also no fundamental interest overlap between farmer and worker. Actually, there's a somewhat antagonistic relationship as buyer and seller of foodstuff. The bigger problem, however, is problem number two, the issue with rapid industrialization. In underdeveloped nations, you both have a lack of industry and backward agriculture. The lack of industry means that those nations aren't self-sufficient in the production of machinery. They need to import foreign machinery in order to keep their industrial base going. So they don't really have the heavy industry in order to support rapid industrial expansion. The backwardness in agriculture means that agricultural production methods are less efficient, so a higher percentage of people need to be employed in food production in order to sustain the population. Rapid industrialization saw the use of the rural population either as industrial workers or as construction workers to modernize the industry. With this, you lower the amount of people working in agriculture and thereby lower the agricultural output. However, the demand for food remains the same. In cases of really rapidly attempted industrialization, this leads to starvation, since the new demand for food far outweighs the production of food, especially if food is exported in order to get the income required for the import of more machinery. This led to starvation, as seen both in the Great Leap Forward and the Holodomor. The states best capable of enforcing those policies and dealing with the resulting unrest, police states which lack actual democracy and don't have political supremacy of the lower classes. In this way, both China under Mao and the Soviet Union under Stalin failed to achieve the dictatorship of the proletariat. If we are trying to figure out how a communistic revolution would happen, we cannot simply look to the USSR and China. There are always historical anomalies. Switzerland and the USA are both examples of early liberal revolutions, without them being representative of how liberalism spread within Europe. The USSR and China were also ultimately a failure. Both failed to abolish wage labor, and both returned to capitalism. So focusing your theoretical investigation on them unproductive, since they are not representative of a successful communist revolution, which would need to happen in an economically developed nation.